Oh, hello folks. We're interrupting normal programming for a special bulletin. Apparently a local fundy atheist was trying to stop a train head first. It didn't work out too well, and we've got a news team on the scene so we can find out what the heck he was thinking. To begin though, we better go back and have a look at the vid I made, which apparently inspired him to go after that train head first. Let's roll him.
Wheel! Oh! Stupid!
Hello folks. It's time for Wheel of Stupid. Today we have part 3 of our series on this Facebook graphic. We've already given the background on this in part 1, so let's get right to spinning the wheel. Let her rip, sweetie. This time it's soldier and prisoner of war, appealing to 2 passages in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Do these give us guidelines for marriage we should follow today? Let's see what these fundy atheists do with our questions. Fundy atheist number 1. Why did Israel spare 32,000 Midianite virgins in Numbers 31?
Well, duh, because they wanted lots of sex.
Good grief, these guys have dirty minds. Fundy atheist number 2. Please explain the treatment of a female prisoner of war in Deuteronomy 21:11-14.
Gee, that's easy. Those Hebrews were a bunch of sex-crazed maniacs who tried to get it any way they could.
Sheesh, you gotta wonder what kind of social life these guys have. And now, fundy atheist number 3. Do these passages offer us models for marriage in modern times? Oh well, the answer of course is no. Numbers, as we saw, isn't even about marriage. And Deuteronomy actually undermines one of the dehumanizing principles of ancient warfare, which allowed indiscriminate raping of female prisoners. So unless you're a fundy atheist whose morals are in the gutter already, you won't need that. And of course, despite the graphic, there's nothing about having to sexually submit in either passage. See you next time on
Wheel! Oh! Stupid!
Okay, so now we're ready to see what this fundy atheist moron has to say about why he ended up in this train wreck. So, what was the first point you were trying to make exactly?
You don't cite any sources to substantiate your assertion that girls in the days of Moses were normally married by age 12. There's absolutely nothing in the law of Moses that says what age a girl should be married.
Wow, he must have hit a train head first before this. So where do you get the blithering idiot idea that if it isn't actually said in the Bible, it can't be the way it is? I mean, come on. The Bible doesn't say at what age kids should start eating solid food either, or at what age they normally start working in the fields. How do you think scholars got the information that 12 was the normal age for marriage? The social data showed it was.
I did not ever express or imply that something had to be stated in the Bible to be true.
No, hold it right there. I've heard enough bovine excrement. What you specifically said was that the designation of the age of 12 is found nowhere in the law of Moses. That's a useless statement unless your point is that the law of Moses has some sort of authoritative bearing on the question. You're noting the lack of a statement in that specific source is nothing more or less than a statement that it had to be in the Bible, in the law of Moses, to be in some way an authoritative statement on the question, whether true or not. So cut the gaslighting, it won't work here.
I was only pointing out that you didn't cite any scholarly sources for it.
Yeah, and so what? Even you admit that it's a generalization by ancient Near Eastern scholars that 12 is the normal age for marriage. Why would I need to cite an authority for that when you admit that it was a generalization shared by scholars, you moron?
Given how much the Bible God hates the ways of the pagan nations of the ancient Near East, it's not very biblical to just assume whatever was true for everybody else in the ancient Near East was likely true for Moses too.
What kind of stupid reasoning is that? No, wait, don't answer that. It's the same stupid reasoning you used before. Namely that the Bible is the single and only useful source for information about how to interpret the Bible. Well, as we've already shown, that kind of reasoning is for ignorant and immature people only, and it's self-refuting. If you've got evidence that the norm for the day was not the norm for the Hebrews, then you'd better present it. If you don't have any, then shut up. There was nothing especially tied to pagans being pagans that made them believe 12 was the normal age for marriage, and your whole argument is concocted on the notion that anything and everything pagans did could not be assumed to be normal for the Hebrews, just because pagans did the same thing. What kind of idiot reasoning are you going to pull next?
I wasn't saying you were necessarily wrong. I was just pointing out that if you're going to honor the Bible's intention that the Hebrews be viewed as standing out from the pagan nations, then you need to do a bit more work to say something is true about ancient Hebrews than simply to observe that the trait was true about pagans.
Good night, that's even stupider than your original claim. First of all, this idiocy about the Bible's intentions is nothing but a bunch of made-up garbage. Yes, the Hebrews were supposed to be a light to the nations, because they worshipped the true God and because they worshipped Him with the prescribed forms. The age of marriage had nothing to do with that. The pagans didn't approve of marriage at 12 because Baal or Molech specifically commanded it. The reason 12 was the standard age was biological, not religious. As soon as humans could make kids, that was the marker for getting married. And no matter what god the Hebrews worshipped, human biology wasn't about to change for that. Do you get it? Or do you need to watch a few more episodes of your favorite Sesame Street songs in order to get the point?
In a 2015 Theology Web post, you and your ilk argued based on Ezekiel 16, 7 through 8, that the Hebrews thought the age of consent for sex was...
Wait, hold it. I wasn't involved in that discussion about Ezekiel 16, and I don't think that Ezekiel 16, 7 through 8 says anything pro or con about an age of consent. But let's also get something straight here. I'm not saying 12 is a normative age of consent. I'm saying it was the norm to be married. And as I already said, consent was never a factor in deciding who you would marry.
You're missing the point. The point is that you say that God thinks sex within the marriage of an adult man to a prepubescent girl is sin. So that means...
Wait, hold it again. Where do I say that?
You mean you don't think it's sin?
Look, stupid. Why are there laws in the modern world against pedophilia? Is it because one of the parties is prepubescent? No, and it couldn't be. If it was, it would mean that it was illegal to have sex with someone who was over 18 and had a disease that caused a delay in puberty. The reason we have laws against pedophilia is because it's assumed that the younger party is not mature enough to provide meaningful consent to sexual activity. So no, I don't argue that God thinks sex within the marriage of an adult man to a prepubescent girl is sin. I do argue that God thinks forcing non-consensual sex on someone is sin, as is made clear against biblical punishments for rape. Do you get the difference, or is that too complicated a distinction for your little mind to handle?
But you think that where God doesn't specify something in the Bible, it's because God expects humans to figure it out.
No, I don't think that, you moron. You're making up fake positions for me again. I never argued anything like that anywhere. The closest I come to saying anything remotely like that is when I say the law codes were didactic. meaning that they were case law which were used as examples for local judicial officials to base further judgments on. To that extent, yes, I don't expect God to specify every single possible instance of potential lawbreaking. But that's because humans are expected to figure it out already by themselves, not because God expects it, you dipstick.
You believe God set up secular authorities based on Romans 13. So that means you believe God was ultimately responsible for stuff like people in Delaware setting the minimum age for sexual consent at age 7.
Well, first of all, no. You need to do a little more digging before running that overflowing with stupid mouth of yours. The reason for the age of consent being so low in Delaware most likely had to do with the fact that the same law also instituted the death penalty for sex with a girl before the age of consent. Before that, the penalty had been a prison sentence. Second, that doesn't follow from my reading of Romans 13, which is informed by proper contextual scholarship. That kind of reading is only for stupid literalist fundies, and moronic ex-fundies like you.
King Ahaz fathered a child when he was 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah, so what?
Well, that forces you without a rebuttal otherwise to admit ancient Hebrews were willing to allow marriage at even younger ages than 12.
Yeah, and so what again? Didn't I say that 12 was the normal age for marriage? And doesn't that sort of get it into your thick skull that that was an average around which there might be some variation both lower and higher?
My point with King Ahaz was not to say that the normative age was lower, but that the ancient Jews found prepubescent marriage acceptable.
Excuse me, Mr. Moron. The point of yours that I replied to was about ages, not puberty. So quit shifting the goalpost when you're getting your backside kicked. Second, I think you'd better take Biology 101. If King Ahaz fathered a child, he'd been through puberty. And newsflash, doofus, in boys that can occur as early as 10 or 11 even today. So where do you get your biology information from? A bag of Cheetos?
If the biblical descriptions of pagan perversions is true, and they really did roast their children to death at pagan altars, then we have a rational basis to conclude that those people were so corrupted that not only did they approve of all forms of sex, but they also had little regard for age.
What? Rational basis? There's no rational basis for an argument that because someone does X, that means they must also do Y, or Y is an entirely different action than X. Look, stupid. Do you understand that one of the main reasons people were married so early was because the typical human lifespan of the day was as low as 25? And do you understand that the concept of adolescence as a developmental period is a relatively modern one? And do you also know that even in the modern United States, there are many states where marriages are allowed as early as 14 or earlier, provided that there is parental and/or judicial consent? Do you get that this indicates that the whole point is not that someone becomes magically mature enough to marry when they pass a specific birthday?
Oh.
Alright, we've seen that your level of brain damage is pretty high at this point, so I'm not too hopeful of hearing anything informed or intelligent from you. But what's next?
You think the Jews scrupulously preserve the oral traditions that are behind the Pentateuch? Well, the Babylonian Talmud says...
Wait, hold it. What did you say, I think?
You, think the Jews scrupulously preserve...
No, I heard you, I just couldn't believe you said something that stupid. I don't believe any such thing as that. Where do you get that crap from? Look, I do not think the Jews accurately preserved the oral tradition all the way from the time of the Pentateuch into the time of the Talmud, after the period of the New Testament. In fact, I recently did a study of that very issue, and my conclusion was that Jewish apologists who made that kind of claim didn't have sufficient evidence to back it up. So don't tell me what I believe just so you can work up a straw man and then knock it down, you moron.
You also said that...
Hold it. How about you admit your blunder in falsely attributing a position to me about Jewish oral tradition? I'm not asking for an apology. I don't need one. I'm asking you to admit that you misrepresented my views and made up a totally fantasized position for me that I don't actually hold.
You also said
No. I said admit your blunder in misrepresenting me. I'm not letting this go because you have a long-term habit of simply making things up out of thin air, like some kind of shadowy John Doe figure. So say it. You misrepresented my views. Fine. Anything you don't say can and will be used against you. Alright, waste some more of my time. What's your next objection?
Several conservative Christian commentators assert that the spared girls in Numbers were intended for marriage or concubinage.
Yeah, okay. How do they answer the specific arguments I referred to?
What?
Do they answer the arguments I referred to?
You set forth your view as though it were an obvious truth. You didn't provide arguments to back up your contrary position.
Say what? Are you even paying attention? I've been referencing the arguments that back up my position. I've appealed to my videos, to other sources, and to other articles. You were just too stupid and lazy to figure that out.
They're properly credentialed Bible scholars and you're not.
Yeah, so my sources are also properly credentialed Bible scholars and you're not. Not only that, there are a lot of properly credentialed Bible scholars who believe that Jesus rose from the dead. So when's your conversion happening?
I never expressed or implied that scholarly support for a rendering meant that rendering was accurate. My point was that because they were Christian scholars, they must have had an existing bias against translating something in the Bible that made God look bad. And that means...
No, hold it right there. That's exactly what you did. You hoisted the specter of scholars with a certain position as a reason to accept that position. One you clearly agreed with. All this rap about existing bias and things that make God look bad is just a wild fantasy of yours. You've never met any of those scholars. You have no evidence that they are or were ever worried about making God look bad. And you have no idea whether or not they're biased. You're just making things up out of thin air to suit what you want to be true, you moron. Yeah, exactly. Bottom line is you're just a hypocrite with that appeal. And as an aside, just because one of those girls might be taken as a wife is not the same thing as saying they were automatically graduated into sexual activity at that time. Maybe you're too immature or too oversexed to understand the difference. Alright, so how about Deuteronomy? Tell me something about how stupidly you can reinterpret that.
Your effort to argue that this law did not approve of rape runs counter to the way at least one Christian Bible committee translates it. The American Bible Society produced the Good News Bible, and they explicitly put rape into the text.
So, what are their arguments for that?
Huh?
What are their arguments for making the text refer to rape?
I don't know. But they're a translation committee. They're scholars.
And as I said, when do you plan to convert because some scholars believe Jesus rose from the dead?
Oh yeah? I'll bet you wouldn't call the translators of the Good News translation morons.
I'd be glad to if that's indeed the case, but I have no idea why they chose to translate that passage the way they did. Whereas I know you have a long history of being a moron. Do you know the name of the scholar or person who translated that passage for the Good News translation?
No.
I didn't think so. You just cherry-picked the Good News translation because it said what you wanted to hear. So again, we're left with this, arguments. And I repeat again, what are the arguments for that position? Look, do you actually have any arguments here, or are you just making this all up as you go along?
There are contextual reasons to support the rape interpretation.
Such as?
Like a rapist, the guy who wrote that law shows no concern whatsoever for whether the woman desires to be married.
So what's your point? All marriages were arranged in that era. Neither the man's nor the woman's desires were ever taken into account.
You're just digging the hole deeper with that point. If there was no consent, then they're far closer to finding acceptable other sex relationships that likewise lacked authentic consent, like adult-child marriage.
Okay, first of all, moron, you're forgetting again that marriage and sex are not the same thing. So no, they're not any closer to sexual relationships of other kinds without consent. Second, what you're claiming would only be true if there was a direct moral connection made between consent for marriage and consent for sexual activity. There isn't. Even today, a married woman can charge her husband with rape. So no, that doesn't follow in the least, and it's not a reasonable conclusion. You're just desperate.
Have you ever seen a man physically abuse a woman? If so, did you draw general conclusions about how he must act in similar situations?
No, that would be stupid.
Huh?
I said it would be stupid, which I suppose must be why you do it and think I would have answered yes to that question. Look, Dimbulb, I have right here a copy of a domestic violence report someone once filed, where among other things, a husband made a kid walk barefoot on hot pavement for 1.5 miles. Now tell me, can we use that report to help us reach a reasonable conclusion that the man was also a pedophile who abused that kid sexually? Yes or no? I didn't think so.
Because he's part of an invading army. The woman was most unlikely to ever have sexual feelings for the man.
And what makes you think sexual feelings were ever considered in arranged marriages? Precisely, they weren't. These are objections that would be raised by a modern person in an individualist society where love is the basis for marriage. Not what someone in their world would say. In their world, the main thing was personal honor and securing progeny.
Well gee, why did God give women a clitoris? Haven't you read the Song of Songs?
Several times, and you're being a screw-up again when you appeal to it. Obviously, you're so immature that you're confusing physical sexual desire with the emotional intimacy associated with sexual relationships. In any event, neither of those had the priority that honor and securing progeny had. And keep in mind, bozo, that Song of Songs would have been written by a member of the literate elite who had already secured all they wanted in terms of honor and progeny. So that gave them the leisure to wax poetic about sexual pleasure. And that doesn't in any way mean that sexual feelings were considered important.
But sexual satisfaction is a command of God in the Bible. Look at Proverbs 5:19.
Good night, you're stupid. Proverbs contains just that, Proverbs. Proverbs are pithy sayings that reflect general truisms. They aren't commands.
There are grammatical reasons to support the rape interpretation.
Such as?
The word used there, translated humbled, is used in other contexts where rape occurs.
Yeah, I know. Crazy Pills 2 came up with that stupid objection too. What you and he fail to realize is that in an honor-based society, there were a heck of a lot more ways for someone to be humbled. In this case, the shame would have come from being sent away by her husband. Obvious contextual clue, moron.
I don't see the point. Rape certainly qualifies as dishonoring all by itself.
No, you wouldn't see the point because you're too stupid. The point is that you have a burden to analyze and dispose of all the alternatives, which is something you obviously don't have the intelligence or fortitude to do, as opposed to simply running a translation up the flagpole.
Look. The most obvious contextual clue is that the Hebrews were a bunch of barbaric idiots who did stuff like punish people by burning them to death. Therefore, it's stupid to assume that they wouldn't have done the most barbaric thing possible in other circumstances.
And that's really your only argument in the end, isn't it? I thought so. One more thing before we go.
What?
Look out. Gee, you'd think he'd at least be smart enough not to keep standing in the middle of the tracks like that. Not.